Welcome to the complete story series for Manga Storian. Today we're going to be covering Berserk, chapter 37 to 41. I hope you guys are prepared. All alterations to the panel text and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. Now, at the end of our last video, Guts began to set off on his own, leaving the band of Hawks. However, before leaving, Casca told Griffith of Guts' plan, and the two went to try and stop him. After a duel where Guts won, Guts left, leaving all that he had fought for behind him. Night began to set as Guts sits alone around a campfire. Off in the distance, he begins to hear something, but then only sees that it's a wolf. It's been 3 years since he had to sleep alone. Everyone used to always be around him back then, but Guts begins to wonder, did he make the right choice by leaving? It all started after he heard Griffith say those words, and since then, he ultimately changed. As Guts sits staring at the fire, a shadow begins to loom over him. He quickly grabs his sword and prepares himself for what could be in the shadows. Could it be Zod? The shadow moves behind Guts, but he can't move. He could be attacked. The shadow then swings, and Guts swings back, but what he sees is nothing. And then the shadow begins to take a shape, one of a man in a skeleton-like armor riding a horse. The Skull Knight says that the gears have been set in motion, and then he calls out to Guts, calling him the Struggler. From this moment until the eclipse 1 year from now, him and his friends will walk blindly into their doom. But there is one thing that he must remember. He was born from a corpse, and he struggles every day with death. So struggle, challenge, and rise to struggle again. Never forget that. Guts shouts, "What do you mean?" But the Skeleton Knight turns and walks off, disappearing. Guts wonders if it was an illusion, but looking at the horse prints on the ground, he knows that it wasn't. Back in Midland, the rain begins to pour down and Charlotte looks out her window. Her servants tell her that she should go to bed early to avoid catching a cold, but as she does, she hears a knock on the window. She looks back to see Griffith standing outside. She lets him in and Griffith tells her that he's sorry for coming in all wet and visiting so late. But Charlotte just hugs him. Charlotte then says how she so badly wanted to see him again. She was always afraid that she would hear what happened to him. Why didn't he come sooner? And Griffith says nothing, and then his eyes change. And then he kisses Charlotte. At first, Charlotte doesn't know what to do, but then she gives in, allowing Griffith's hands to wander. He moves her closer to the bed and she tells him no as he lays on top of her. He tells her scary and sad things may arouse her. And moments later, their bodies become one. However, through the noises coming from Charlotte's room, a servant looks into the keyhole and sees what's happening. As Charlotte begins to fall back asleep, Griffith sits up, touching the scar on his chest, and he begins to cry. The next morning, Charlotte wakes up to see Griffith is already gone, and then she sees the magnet that she gave him has been returned. She begins to feel a pain, and then she looks under her sheets to see blood. Outside, Griffith hops over the walls to return, but as he does, he sees soldiers and they quickly surround him. The commander then tells them to go away and take him away. Meanwhile, the king goes to visit Charlotte and barges into her room. She tells him even if he's her father, he can't come bursting into her chambers, and then he notices the marks around her neck. He pulls away the blankets to see the blood stain. A little while later, Griffith is taken to the torture chambers as the king walks in. The king tells him that he treated him as a fellow warrior, and he now knows everything he's ever said in praise is just lies. The king then grabs a whip and begins striking him. Though his daughter may be a stupid girl, not realizing the importance of her inheritance, she was everything to him. The king continues whipping Griffith over and over, telling him that he had to take away the only warm flower in his life. And that cannot be forgiven. 17 years he raised her as a pure body, and Griffith destroyed her. But as the king goes on, Griffith says he wanted to kiss her, didn't he? He wants to sleep with her. Is that it? He could have had her married off to strengthen his relationships with other nations, but instead he kept her locked away. Enraged, the king goes back to whipping, tearing the flesh off Griffith's body, shouting, "What do you know?" Even after the king is done, Griffith hangs there, smiling. The king then tells the executioner that he could do whatever he wants to that man. He is now an enemy of the country. Just make sure that he lives so that he can think about what he's done. Before leaving though, the king says that it's a shame that the hawk fell to earth only to never fly again. Afterwards, the king returns to Charlotte's chambers as she sleeps, wondering what did Griffith do to her body. He then pauses and he begins to grope Charlotte, pulling down her blouse. She begins to wake up seeing her father touching her and she begins to scream. All the while, Griffith sits in his cell. Back upstairs, the king is getting ready to get on top of his own daughter, but she manages to push him away. He tells her to wait, he just wants to touch her, and then he begins to kiss her, but she pushes him away again. The king tries to spread her legs, but after Charlotte kicks him repeatedly in the face, he finally backs away. Elsewhere in the field, Casca rides with the Hawks to meet with Griffith, but off in the distance, Pippin hears something. He shouts for everyone to get down, but before anyone can react, arrows pour down from the sky. Many of the Hawks are killed, but as everyone looks around them, they see that it's not the enemy, it's the Midland armies. The Midland army starts to close in, continuing to fire crossbow at the Hawks, slaughtering most of them. And Casca tells everyone to try and get into formation, but then she sees the bolts flying her way. Back down to the torture room, the executioner tells Griffith that he's pretty strong for not crying, and then he notices Griffith's necklace, and he decides that he's going to take it for himself. But as he looks at the egg, one of the eyes open up, and he ends up dropping it down the drain. Off the egg floats into the waters below. A year later in a far-off castle, the nobles gather to watch a fighting tournament. The next fight will be with the one known as the Crazy Killer, said to have killed 130 Midland soldiers in the 100-Year War. His opponent is a man who is entering the competition for the first time, yet no one knows of his origins. Also watching this fight is Guts, who is waiting in the shadows. The fight begins and the Crazy Killer begins to rush forward swinging. The unknown man easily dodges the attacks, then finally catches the blades with his guitars. While holding the sword in place, the man begins kicking Crazy Killer's face over and over, and Crazy Killer pulls back and slams his sword down. But again, the man catches the blade. Using his weapon in a scissor motion, the man cuts the blade of the sword, and the Crazy Killer tells him he surrenders. The man says that this country's swordsmanship is pathetic, mere child's play for anyone trained like him. The crowds begin to cheer, and then out of the shadows, Guts steps forward. He tells the man that he looks like he wants to fight someone more skilled, and the man gets ready, stating that although it's just for entertainment, he still has to be ready for anything. Guts motions for him to come on, but the man stops. He looks at Guts and he asks if he even thinks he can win with that, and Guts tells him, "Come on, let's do this already." The man rushes forward, thrusting his blade towards Guts, but Guts just dodges side to side, weaving out of the strikes. The man then kicks and Guts catches it with the hilt of his blade, and then the man kicks with his other foot. Guts blocks the second kick with his hand, but now with his hands both immobilized, the man strikes. Just before the man can stab Guts' stomach, he swings his sword, throwing the man to the ground, telling him, "You should join the circus with those moves." The crowds begin to cheer for Guts' victory, and the noble hosting the event runs down to tell Guts that it was actually designed to find the stronger fighters so that he can ask them to come and work with him. Would he be interested? Guts tells him no, he was just looking for someone strong. And then the noble mentions that there's a thieves' gang who is run by a strong woman. Not even men can stand against her. The noble then goes on to state that he should have heard of them. They used to be soldiers. They were the Hawk something. Guts grabs the man and he says, "That's right, the Band of Hawks." Guts thinks about it. The Band of Hawks is being led by Casca now? Back over in Midland, a pair of Midland scouts stumble upon the Hawks camp, most of which are beaten and bruised. Judo enters Casca's tent, telling her that if she keeps working too hard, her body won't make it. However, they did just get word from their spy in the palace who said Griffith is being held at the lowest level in the Tower of Rebirth. Though it's been a year, only few people have heard his voice. But this past month, his voice has ceased altogether. Judo goes on telling her that they may have elected her as the leader for now, but she doesn't have to take on all of the responsibilities herself. So in other words, go to bed after eating. As Judo leaves, Casca takes a bite of her food and then collapses from exhaustion. Outside, the soldiers sit around, but as one of the guards doze off, a bladed circle flies through the air, cutting into the guard. The man Guts fought pulls the ring out of the guard's skull, stating he can't believe there was no reaction. Is the Band of Hawks really worth his skills? He gets ready and then he tells his men to go, and suddenly the Hawks camp is overrun. Judo calls out that there's an enemy attack, and Casca rushes out of her tent to see the fight has already begun. She begins to give everyone battle commands, and the man tells her no wonder she's the leader of the Hawks. But no matter who the leader is, once they're down, the game is over. Casca readies herself and the man lunges forward, thrusting his guitars at her. Casca tries to swing back, but the man catches the blade and kicks her down. He then continues his assault, pushing her back further and further, and then he pins her down, her head between his blades, and he tells her, "It's over. If you surrender, I won't kill you, but I'm only counting to 3. 1, 2, 3. But before he can cut, a voice says 4 and kicks him in the back of the head. His body goes flying and everyone turns to see Guts. He tells Casca, "Don't let the circus fighter scare you. Be strong." And then he smiles at Casca. The man gets up, stating that he can't believe that he is the man who killed 100 men. No wonder he's so cruel. Guts tells Casca that he'll take care of this guy, she should go do her part. The man pulls out bladed ring, stating that he humiliated him in the competition, so let him repay him with these war wheels. Guts stares at him, stating, "You really are a circus fighter. It's a waste to call you a warrior." The man flings the rings into the air past Guts, and then he tells him that he is doomed. The rings circle back and they fly towards Guts, and then they suddenly drop. They begin to twirl around Guts' finger and hilt, and he asks, "Is that all you have?" The man pulls out a sword, but then the sword is split into several blades, all whipping around. The blades start to flail, cutting through Guts' cloak, some hitting him, but Guts just smiles, licking the dripping blood from his cheek. He jumps side to side, avoiding the whipping blades until he stops, and he gets ready to swing. The man says that he accepts his challenge, and he whips the blades forward. Guts takes his sword and he swings upwards so hard that a gust of wind flies up, disrupting the blades. He then charges forward, slamming the man back down. Though the man catches the blades, he jumps back as his turban becomes undone, showing his face. The soldiers call him Salat, but he just stops, and then he says, "Your name is Guts, right? I'll remember that." And suddenly, the attackers are gone. Guts looks back to see Casca and the remaining Hawks that are still alive. Things are getting even creepier and more twisted in this manga, but I hope you guys are enjoying it because it's still one of my all-time favorites. One of the first ones that I read back when I was a kid. All right, guys, don't forget to follow us on Twitter @Mangastorian, and I'll see you next time right here